Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Amy Beckman-Collier, a member of the St. Catherine of Siena Dialogue Series Planning Committee. And on behalf of the committee and St. Catherine of Siena Church and Student Center, I welcome you to this panel presentation, which will address the state of immigration in Iowa. The St. Catherine of Siena Dialogue Series is not a speaker or lecture series. Instead, it's a series within a series. That is, it's not just an attempt to bring to Des Moines a nationally recognized speaker on an important topic. Our goal is to provide opportunities to listen, converse, and then act for the common good. Today's event is the launch of our inaugural dialogue series. With it, we demonstrate our desire to provide a forum to gain context, to set the table for the keynote address on March 2nd. In turn, that presentation will allow us to consider our response in light of what we hear so that we can take action for the common good. Today, we are privileged to hear from experts on a variety of facets of the very complex topic of immigration. But of course, immigration isn't just a topic for a huge number of our brothers and sisters in this community and throughout the United States. It's a lived experience, and one that you obviously want to know more about. We are grateful to our panelists for their investments of time and expertise in helping us to learn, and to Connie Ryan, who will serve as the moderator of the panel. We invite you to deepen your understanding as we gather 1 month from today, Sunday, March 2nd, at Sheslow Auditorium on Drake University's campus to hear from Bishop Mark Seitz of the Diocese of El Paso, Texas. Bishop Seitz has lived and served in El Paso, a borderland city, since 2013, and his extensive experience with immigrants, Texas elected officials, community members, and border agents will certainly provide the backdrop for an enlightening address. The third event in our series within a series will take place on March 29th. We call it an action workshop, and we have designed it so that individuals, as well as representatives of faith communities, can learn about the practical needs of organizations serving immigrants and refugees in our community, and to consider making a commitment to meet some of those needs. Given the recent actions of the new administration, those organizations' needs have grown exponentially. All of us can help, and we invite you to do so. This event is being live streamed, and an archival recording of the panel will be available next week on the St. Catherine of Siena website. Following the panel and a Q&A, we invite you to be in conversation with others while enjoying refreshments. We hope you'll take time to linger and to be in solidarity with others who are eager to listen, converse, and act for the common good. Now I'd like to turn the microphone over to Connie Ryan, who is the Executive Director of the Interfaith Alliance of Iowa. Connie's bio, along with those of the other participants in the panel, can be found in your program. Thank you.
Good afternoon. As Amy said, I'm Connie Ryan. I'm the Executive Director of Interfaith Alliance of Iowa, and I'm honored to be here today with all of our panel members and with you. And we welcome you to the inaugural conversation for this newly created dialogue series, Faith in Action for the Common Good, conceived and created by St. Catherine of Siena in Des Moines. Interfaith Alliance of Iowa is honored to be a partner in the conversation leading up to this opening event. And we are grateful to those who have not only had the vision, but the determination, the hard work to get us to today. And so a special thank you to the planning team and to the donors who have been part of this series and the planning, if they will stand to be recognized. As you heard, each dialogue series will include 3 parts: dialogue, conversation, and taking action. Each series will delve into different topics. With that in mind, we begin the dialogue series on immigration, a critically important topic in these times. Today's dialogue is entitled Context and Conversation, the State of Immigration in Iowa. Stepping back a moment, a couple of housekeeping items. Bathrooms are over there. Feel free to go whenever you need. Please turn off your cell phones so that we aren't interrupted in the conversation. If you will go ahead and check that they are off. You were given index cards on your chairs in case you have questions. We're not going to collect the cards. They are for your use only. So if you want to write down a thought or a question, there will be Q&A following all of the panel members after the 5th panel member, and we will do Q&A at that point. So the cards are just for your own benefit, and if you want to write notes to yourself. We hope that you also will remain afterward for conversation and treats in the back. And so let's get on with today's dialogue. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our panel members. Lori Chesser needs no introduction to many of us. She is president of Denton's Davis Brown Law Firm in Des Moines. Lori has been practicing immigration law for most of her career. She will ground us in the history of immigration in Iowa. Zervang is the legal director at Catholic Charities Immigration Legal Services with the Archdiocese of Dubuque. Her focus today will be Immigration 101. What do people need to know to understand various categories of immigration and refugee status, federal and community supports for communities, and other information, I'm quite sure. Our 3 remaining panel members are all part of organizations that do the work on the ground, and they are part of the work of assisting and being with immigrant and refugee communities. And they will talk about also the impact of the many changes happening today and in the foreseeable future. So we have Dima Abu Asaf, the Refugee Program Manager at Catholic Charities, Ben Nguyen, who is the Education and Workforce Manager at Immigrant and Refugee Community Services for Lutheran Services in Iowa, and Erica Johnson, Founding Executive Director of Iowa Migrant Movement for Justice. Let us begin with Lori Chesser.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm going to give you a short history of immigration in Iowa to give you some context about where we are today. And I'll try to get my slides too. Okay, so the territory that became Iowa was opened to settlement in 1833. By 1845, we had pushed the Native Americans out of the territory, and so by 1846, the Iowa became a state. Now, most of the settlement was from people moving from the East Coast or whatever to Iowa, people who were born in the United States. But there were several immigrant groups, which we'll talk about. And so in the 1850s, when there was sort of a nativist anti-immigrant movement going on in the United States, Iowa actually resisted that movement called the Know Nothing Party because, you know, we really wanted people to settle Iowa. And by the 1870s, Iowa State Board of Immigrants was established to recruit people to Iowa. And here's a pamphlet that they published that you can actually buy online or look at online if you'd like to publicize Iowa to people to come from Europe primarily and settle. Okay, so from the 1830s to the 40s, we have kind of the territory settlement era. So like I said, most of the settlers were from inside the US, but Germans began arriving in the 1830s, and then Swedish and Dutch immigrants began arriving in the 1840s. So to focus on the German immigration to Iowa, just as an example, many people left Germany to avoid military service because there was a lot of unrest in the German states that eventually led to a revolution that didn't go so well in 1848. But even though the Germans left, and I will say my great-grandfather who moved to Nebraska was in that movement, even though the Germans left to avoid the military service, when the Civil War broke out, Germans were among the first to enlist and supported the Union during the Civil War. And Germans became the largest population in Iowa by around the turn of the immigrant population in Iowa around the turn of the century. So now, of course, when we think of German immigration, we think of the Amana colonies. The Amana colonies were founded in 1855 by a German religious group that bought 26,000 acres of Iowa land to make their isolated and self-sufficient communities so they could live in a communal way. Now, of course, it's a popular tourist destination. To focus on Dutch immigration a little bit, many people left Holland because of crop failures and agricultural problems, and they sought land and access to the rivers so they could sell their crops. They founded Pella, and by 1860, 2,600 Dutch were settled there. But later, after the Civil War, many went to northwest Iowa, so you know the community of Orange City, and around there, there's a lot of Dutch. So when we think of Pella now, we think of tulip time. Pella was settled in 1847 by 800 Dutch immigrants, and they named the city after a place where Christians went for refuge during the Jewish-Roman War, because they were also seeking religious freedom. Then we go to the 1850s to the 1920s that I'm calling the expansion period. So we had, of course, a lot of people from different countries coming to the United States and coming to Iowa. So just to name a few, we have the Norwegians, and they came because of lack of farmland in Norway. The Irish came because they were fleeing the potato famine. The Italians arrived a little bit later, in the later 1800s and early 1900s. They were fleeing economic problems in Italy, and they came primarily to work in the coal mines in central Iowa. They had boys even as young as 14 working in the coal mines at that time. Interesting fact I found out, Jews from Russia came to escape religious persecution, and actually before the Civil War, there were more Jews in Keokuk than in Chicago. And then Mexicans started coming in the 1910s. There were only, according to the census, 29 Mexicans in Iowa at the turn of the century, but the Mexican Revolution broke out in 1910, and Mexicans started coming, and of course were, I shouldn't say of course, but to do the very hardest work. They were doing meat packing, brick making, and other agricultural jobs. And they experienced discrimination and lived in very poor conditions because by the law that was in effect at that time, they couldn't become US citizens. So now, for most of these groups, we celebrate the immigrant groups that came. I have some pictures there of the different dance troupes that are from these countries that celebrate their heritage in Iowa. Now, in the 1920s through 70s, we had a contraction of immigration nationally. There was a very strong anti-immigrant movement that sort of came to a head in the 20s with some restrictive laws, and those were aimed primarily at keeping Catholics and Jews from immigrating. Because they thought that Catholics and Jews would not integrate well with our largely Protestant population. And so they limited immigration to the percentage of people from that country who were already here. So it's interesting to look at some of those charts if you ever have time. They're online. Then, of course, we had the Great Depression and 2 world wars, and so, we really didn't have a lot of movement, and that led to some very tragic things, actually, during World War II. But the immigration laws were finally changed in the 1960s as part of the civil rights movement. Now, the change was supposed to, on its face, looked more open, but actually the sponsor of the bill was trying to keep restrictions by making most of immigration based on family relationship, which he and his supporters believed would keep that sort of same mix of people who were already here in the United States. It didn't quite work out that way, as we can see from the population of our country now. Now, going back to Iowa specifically, Iowa really shone during the 1970s. After the Vietnam War, there was, of course, a real refugee crisis in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos as the Communist Party of China took over that area. So President Ford, in 1975, I believe it was, offered governors $500 per person to resettle people from that area. Governor Bob Ray took the challenge and settled almost 1,500 people during that time, mostly the Tai Dam people. They had to make an exception to the federal rule about how many people could settle in a particular location because he was willing to take so many. Then we had a second Southeastern Asia resettlement in 1979 because Governor Ray traveled to a refugee camp in Thailand that was holding Cambodian refugees and saw the terrible conditions and plight of the people there. And he decided to take another 1,500 people from that area. This time there was no federal aid, and he went directly to churches and other community groups to ask for assistance. Now, this is, valued in our history, but at the time it was a controversial move. Many people pushed back on this, and they were afraid of job competition and diversion of resources and racial mixing. At that time, the Iowa Refugee Resettlement Office was opened. And so just very briefly, refugee resettlement started in earnest in the 1980s when a federal law was passed. Iowa has resettled more than 30,000 refugees since 1975, and it was the only state to have a state refugee bureau in the United States, but also several other agencies, some of which are represented here, who resettle refugees. Obviously, there's been some changes in that in the past few years, which you'll hear more about. But refugees are not the only immigrants to come from Iowa, and of course, we have a lot of foreign students at our colleges and universities. We have professional workers in many occupations, entrepreneurs, international business representatives, and priests, religious, and religious workers. If you read the bishop's column in the Catholic Mirror last week, you would have learned that half of the priests in the Diocese of Des Moines were born abroad. And just to end, I wanted to just give a representation that, Iowa now includes people from all over the world. This is a map you can find on the Des Moines Public Schools website that shows the countries of birth of the children that attend Des Moines Public Schools. There are more than 80 countries represented and more than 100 languages. So I hope that gives you some context for the rest of our conversation.
So for some of us who are vertically challenged, we gotta just stick with me for just a moment while I adjust to make sure you all can see me and hear me. But it's really timely with the introduction that Lori just gave us about a background of the history of immigration here in Iowa. My family and I were direct recipients of that second wave of Southeast Asian refugee that Governor Ray was courageous enough to say we need to help refugees who are suffering in those camps in Thailand and in Southeast Asia. So my family and I arrived here in lovely Decorah, Iowa in 1979. So my family and I have been here as recipients of that program and that legacy in the last 45 years. And so I want you all to think about that, in particular these challenging times when we are faced with obstacles and individuals and groups who want to tell our state and our country who's welcome and who's not welcome. And so my portion and my task this afternoon is to talk a little bit about the current state of immigration. And so what I'd like to do is, let's make sure that we can get to my slides here. I think it's important to kind of just briefly share with you Catholic Charities, the Archdiocese of Dubuque, on our Immigration Legal Services program and what we do. Many of you know, particularly here in the state, we have 4 dioceses. The Archdiocese of Dubuque, particularly, we didn't have an immigration program until I actually joined Catholic Charities and built out our Immigration Legal Services program. The work we do is really focused on family-based, humanitarian-based immigration services in 30 counties in Northeast Iowa. And so I wanted to share this with you so you understand sort of the landscape that I'm talking about, but in general, what we'll be sharing with you this afternoon. Our focus really is about keeping families together, reuniting families together. And that encompasses all sorts of work that we do in providing legal advocacy, representation for immigrants who need help through helping to apply for green cards, refugees who come here and then need to legalize their status, as well as those seeking protection through asylum seekers and helping to adjust their status, as well as a number of individuals who may want to reunite with their family members who are stuck abroad. And so the screen in front of you shows you sort of a brief makeup of what our federal government looks like, specifically the federal agencies that are responsible for and involved in the adjudication or intersection of immigration law. On the top there, obviously, the executive office with the White House and the president. In particularly, my talk will focus on the Department of Homeland Security, particularly as it relates to its enforcement and adjudication of immigration applications. So if you see there, the focus is in the world of immigration, Lori can attest, but we love our alphabet soup acronym. And so please bear me. I'll try really hard not to use too many acronyms, but we'll make sure to share it. But in particular interest, I want to highlight the 3 subdivision branch underneath the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS. You have United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, which is responsible for adjudicating the affirmative applications like green card applications, citizenship applications, and well as employment applications who are seeking legal authorization to work here. That's just an example of some of the numerous affirmative applications that USCIS is engaged in. And historically, it's been a subdivision branch that is seen or perceived as the more friendly towards, I think, affirmative immigration applications. You have another subdivision there called Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement. Also works in tandem with Customs and Border Protection. Those 2 subdivisions are really the enforcement arm of DHS, Department of Homeland Security, particularly understanding that CBP, Customs Border Protection, is really the agency that is responsible for enforcement, making sure that there isn't contraband or illegal items being brought into the United States, whether you're talking about land or sea. The other subdivision, ICE, Immigration, Customs Enforcement, which you will have probably heard quite a bit in the last 2 weeks, is the branch that is responsible for enforcement in the interior generally, which is responsible for investigating individuals who are non-citizens who have committed or violated immigration laws. So that's just to ground you on our federal agencies so we know what we're talking about with respect to who's involved in terms of federal agencies. Now, I want to just do a caveat that the information I'm sharing with you today is accurate as of February 2nd, 2 o'clock p.m. because we know we are in the midst of quite a bit of chaos and uncertainty with respect to this new administration. And I want to make it very clear, if it hasn't been already, but it is our belief that regardless of how complex and challenging of a time we are in, our ministry and the work we do in serving immigrants and refugees in this state as well as across the country, particularly as Catholic Charities and the Church, is deeply rooted in our Catholic social teachings. And so we believe access to justice and access to making sure that we uplift the dignity of every single person, regardless of their immigration status, is critical to making sure that we can welcome the neighbor. And these are deeply rooted American values, and we should not let anyone else tell us that that's not what we should stand for and what our future should continue to uphold. And so with that, generally people ask, well, what are some ways, lawful ways in which people can enter the United States to gain legal status? I break it up into 4 different categories. There's the family-based process, as I mentioned, through individuals who are U.S. citizens or lawful permanent residents who can petition or sponsor for their relatives. And in the context of immigration law, immigration is really specific about who they consider immediate relatives or individuals in your family in which you can petition or sponsor. There's another category called what I would consider humanitarian immigration relief. These are individuals who are fleeing their country or are here and maybe have suffered abuse and are seeking immigration protection in the United States. So it encompasses those who are seeking asylum, those who are unaccompanied immigrant children who are here and have been abandoned or neglected by a parent and find themselves here and need protection through filing the Special Immigrant Juvenile Status, which our office handles quite a bit. And then our DACA, our Dreamers, as well as individuals who've suffered and are survivors of domestic abuse, sexual assault, and victims of trafficking. Those are what I would consider humanitarian type of immigration relief. This grid is just to give you an idea. One of the things that we'll talk a little bit later is how do we, myth busting is sort of something that we like to do to make sure that Americans understand the reality of our immigration law and how complex and how long it takes for someone to do it, quote, the legal or right way. If you look at this grid, to just give you an idea, a U.S. citizen, myself, if I wanted to petition and sponsor a sibling who was stuck abroad in Laos, I would be looking at least 17 to 20 years waiting for that application to petition to be ripe enough or ready enough for me to be able to bring my sibling to the United States. That's just to give you an idea of how long these process takes. And so it's not just, hey, you fill out an application and voila, your family relative arrives in the United States within 6 months or less, and they automatically get U.S. citizenship. That is not the way. And this is to give you an idea of how long the process is and how many steps are involved with respect to making sure that someone enters the United States lawfully and adjusts their status lawfully, right? The other process in which you can gain legal status in the United States is through what we call employment-based immigration. This is generally your companies who claim or allege they don't have enough sufficient skilled workers, like our big tech, or here in the state of Iowa, our agribusinesses who may want to petition and sponsor visas for foreign nationals to come to the United States to work because there is a gap and there's a missing number of workforce to complete the job. And so employment-based immigration allows companies in the United States to bring foreign nationals to the United States on a limited visa to work with the intention that they will return back to the country of origin. And lastly, another subgroup called the diversity visa lottery is really as it is. It's kind of like getting a ticket, winning a ticket lottery. And these are specifically for countries that the United States has deemed we don't have enough representation. So the countries listed on the slide are countries that are not eligible for the diversity visa lottery, right? Because the United States deems that these are countries that we've seen over-representation of foreign nationals from these countries. So we want diversity visa lottery available for other countries and nationals that we don't have representation in the United States. So let's talk a little bit about definition. Who is an immigrant? And for purposes of my talk, I really want you all to understand that our definition is really a broad definition. And what we're trying to convey is, as an immigrant in the United States and in Iowa, it's essentially non-citizen resident who intends to make the United States their home, their permanent home, right? And the list of categories or statuses that's on the slide gives you an example. It's not an exhaustive list, but these are the lists of individuals and statuses that our office comes into contact with and works quite a bit with. So the first is your legal or lawful permanent resident or resident alien, also known as an LPR, essentially someone who is a green card holder. And then we also have individuals who are deemed as refugees and asylum seekers or asylees, which I'll talk a little bit about the distinction between those two definitions. And then we also have temporary statuses of individuals who are here in the United States with temporary purposes that may not necessarily have a pathway to lawful permanent residency status, right? So this could be your list of the humanitarian groups that I mentioned earlier, including our dreamers, including our unaccompanied children, including our survivors of violence and crime, and folks who have been granted temporary protected status because their country is going through civil war, violence, natural disasters. So those are some examples of immigrants that are here in the United States and here in Iowa. And lastly, the term undocumented is for individuals who may have entered the United States lawfully, but on various accounts have overstayed their visa and now don't have a valid authorization to be physically present here with proper documentation. It also includes individuals who have entered without inspection, right? Has not been admitted properly through the port of entry so that Customs Border Protection and DHS can inspect their documentation to make sure they have a valid visa to come to the United States. So those are some terminologies of those we considered immigrant. There's also another term in the context of legal immigration that sounds kind of weird. It's called a non-citizen, or a non-immigrant. Non-immigrant is essentially to identify individuals that are here on tourist visas or your international students with the intention, right, that they don't intend to make the United States their home, in theory, and that they will plan to return back to their country of origin. Let's talk about the distinction between refugee and asylee, because oftentimes I hear that term being used interchangeably, as well as using refugee to encompass the groups that I mentioned just earlier. The main important difference between these two categories is that you have to remember a refugee is a person who's been designated by the United Nations High Commission of Refugee as a refugee because they fled their country of origin and cannot return back on account of persecution because they are afraid of returning back to the country, right? So they've been designated this status abroad, right? And most refugees are resettled in the United States by our 8 or 9 national refugee programs, and many of them are here this afternoon that they can share with you what their service entail. And so when they enter the United States, these individuals with the designation refugee already have legal status when they enter the United States, and they are legally authorized to be here and to work here incident to their refugee status, right? Now, after being here in the United States for a year, the anticipation is that refugees are then to adjust or legalize their status to that of a lawful permanent resident, LPR or green card holder, right? And that's good for 10 years, and they can renew that. Asylee, on the other hand, also legal basis, the same thing as refugee, right? Fleeing persecution based on race, religion, nationality, political membership, and political opinion, and membership in a particular social group. However, asylee or asylum seekers are individuals that are applying for asylum protection while they are physically present in the United States. They can come at a port of entry, or they may come, let's say, on a tourist visa or on a valid visa of some sort, even a student visa, and find themselves unable to return back to their country of origin and needing to apply for asylum in the United States. And so that process would be reserved for those who are called asylum seekers. And once you get your asylum case granted, only then would you be considered an asylee. Let's talk a little bit about myth busting, right? And particularly, especially this past week, we've heard on the national news that the term of criminalizing all immigrants as criminal. But let me just make sure that we're clear that the term, like, all of them, including immigrants who enter the United States without inspection or with inspection who overstay their visa, because they illegally broke our nation's law, and therefore they are all criminals. And as far as this administration goes, they consider that these groups of individuals to be all criminals. And the United States is very clear that what that statement says as a myth is inaccurate. It is not a crime to be physically present in the United States without proper documentation. And this was re-articulated in a 2012 U.S. Supreme Court case called Arizona v. United States. And it says that, as a general rule, it is not a crime for a removable alien to remain present, being undocumented in the United States, and it cannot form a basis for an immigrant to be branded, quote, a criminal, right? However, please note, the act of illegally crossing a border without proper documentation, that is a federal crime, and it's considered a misdemeanor that is punishable by a fine or imprisonment, right? So let's make sure that we're clear on that. Being physically present, undocumented in the United States does not make you a criminal. And, you know, one of the things that may then ask the question, well, how does one come into contact with ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, particularly the last 2 weeks, when there's been a whirlwind of executive orders and memorandums that seem to brand all immigrants as criminals. And so this slide kind of shows you some of the situations in which an immigrant, a non-citizen, may potentially eventually come into contact with ICE that could lead them down to potential deportation removal, right? One of the most common ways, unfortunately, is people who come into contact with the criminal justice system. People who make a mistake, whether it's drinking and driving, or whether it's burglary or assault. Those are crimes that will put you at high risk for coming into contact with immigration customs, which could then make you deportable or removable, right? If you apply for a benefit at USCIS for a benefit that you may fraudulent or accidentally, without knowledge, incorrectly apply for, that will trigger potentially contact with immigration customs enforcement, right? Even for folks who have been green card holders and visa holders for a long time, there's another definition or terminology that is applicable to the work we talk about, not just deportation, but inadmissibility. Inadmissibility is really someone who could potentially be a green card holder for 20 years, and they made a mistake and they didn't think anything of it. Let's say they had a couple DUIs and they said, I'm gonna go on a vacation and maybe go to Mexico or to Canada, and then upon re-entering, they could be found inadmissible because of that criminal past history, right? So that's when you may come in contact with ICE or Customs Border Protection. Of course, in this last 2 weeks, we've heard quite a bit of, with respect to mass deportation and raids and targeted enforcement. Individuals, the United States already has individuals that they may be asking to check in with ICE. That's gonna allow you to trigger and probably come into contact with ICE, if not before. And then the other two is if potentially, as we mentioned, ICE check-ins or reporting to ICE because you've been on the roster and you are still waiting for your case to be heard. Any contact with ICE check-in could potentially trigger potential removability for that individual. Okay? This, I will claim, is not to my talented graphic skills, but this is taken from a recent article from the New York Times about specifically the public perception, perhaps, that non-citizen are all undocumented, which is untrue. There are many immigrants in the United States and in Iowa who occupy different immigration lawful statuses, and potentially they may actually occupy more than one legal immigration status, right? And so for the percentage of, let's say they're claiming 13 million are, quote, undocumented, from that population, you look at this graph, the real population that we're looking at that potentially will be impacted is a percentage of folks who already may have legal presence or legal status in the United States, right? And so this is what we're talking about, is these are individuals who are peace-abiding individuals and are here with legal status, but are now, I think, potentially exposed to high risk of deportation under this new administration's policies with respect to their mass deportation plans. I want to just also briefly just talk about, well, who are really the folks that, when they talk about these dangerous criminals, ICE already has these individuals either in detention or know about them. So there are about 39,000 individuals who ICE is aware of, but have actually in custody, and there's still hundreds of thousands of folks who actually are not in detention. And this is what the attempt of mass deportation is intended to do, is to scare our communities so that immigrants themselves may feel like there's no other options but to leave the United States and depart, so that the federal government doesn't have to do the hard job of detaining, hosting, or keeping them in detention centers, and the cost of that, right? So let's just talk a little bit about who's at high risk. Under these new memos and executive order, I think it's clear that individuals who are undocumented, individuals who have prior deportation orders, individuals who may have re-entered after being removed are at high risk of being deported under this new regime of mass deportation plans and executive orders. Recently, the administration has instructed the Department of Homeland Security to expand who they consider to be eligible for what we'll call expedited removal. Up until recently, last week, expedited removal was a policy reserved for individuals that Customs Border Protection came into contact within the southern border or northern border within 100 miles. That has now been expanded into the interior, and the latest memo says even individuals that have what we call parolee status. These are potentially individuals who came through lawfully through the CPB-1 or humanitarian program, potentially could be looking at high risk of deportation if the United States government and this administration decides to terminate the parolee status of those individuals, like Cuban, Haitian, Nicaraguan, Venezuelans, and Ukrainians and Afghans that came through the parole program, right? And so these are individuals. Low risk would be folks who are United States citizens and lawful permanent residents who have not had any criminal contact. Let's talk a little bit about what type of executive orders in the last 2 weeks have passed. There's been 80-some executive orders. I'm just gonna synthesize and highlight some of the more, I think, important ones that you all may be interested in hearing about. We heard about the rescission of the sensitive locations memo, which historically had said that churches, places of worship, schools, hospitals were deemed off limits so that ICE could not effectuate or arrest or detain immigrants. That memo and policy has now been rescinded, and now ICE can essentially go to these locations and investigate, arrest detained individuals in these particular locations. Now, since that memo and executive order has been issued, there's been lawsuits, so there's a lawsuit pending with respect to this particular executive action. We also see the stripping of humanitarian and lawful constitutional protections that historically has been available for immigrants in the United States. I talked about the rescission and revoking of the humanitarian program that would impact Afghans, Ukrainians, Cubans, Haitians, and Nicaraguans. Again, the attempted termination of birthright citizenship, which was part of the executive order that was issued last week, which has been temporarily blocked, so we'll see litigation is pending with respect to that. Lori had talked about the history of birthright citizenship that is enshrined in our 14th Amendment and is actually also re-articulated in an old case from the 1800 Wong R. Kim that really established individuals who are born in the United States soil are guaranteed birthright citizenship, right? And that is now being tested. In addition to these other executive orders, the restriction of the refugee admissions program, which our friends here will talk a little bit more, I'm sure. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the expansion of detention programs and the attempt to scare our communities. More than anything, I think I have the task of also sharing with you what are some things that our community and our organizations can do. So these are just some really brief tips that your organizations can consider in responding to enforcement actions by ICE, right? Consulting with legal counsel about what your privacy plans and visitors policy are, designating an administrator or a supervisor to deal with ICE if they come knocking on your door, including offices and organizations. What's your confidentiality privacy policy? And what is your response when immigration shows up with an arrest warrant that is not a judicial search warrant or arrest warrant? To know the difference. And this is why it's really important we do provide know your rights information to the community so they can make a distinction, understand what their constitutional rights and protections are. And obviously the advice is to not interfere physically with ICE or law enforcement authorities attempting to detain or arrest an individual. We talk a little bit about how can we help, right? These are just some examples of things that you all can do. Share Know Your Rights information, order and print Know Your Rights cards for immigrants, donate, volunteer your time, and obviously create or donate to legal funds for immigrants who are going to need legal services during these challenging times, as well as donating to bond because individuals are going to be detained and held, particularly last week when the president signed this new Lakeland-Riley Act that expands the types of crimes that would be mandated for what we call required detention and that they cannot get bonded out, right? And most importantly, important that we as a community should speak up and use and leverage our privilege of voice for immigrants who may not be able to do so out of fear of deportation or detention. And that the goal of this administration really is to create maximum fear and chaos, and that we need to assume that with that, the administration wants immigrants to leave and depart on their own, right? So that they saves them the time and the effort and the money. Because I think latest statistics talk about in order for the United States to deport 1 million immigrants, it's going to cost the U.S. government $88 billion to do that, right? So how can we help to slow down that attempt and protect our community? And so I know I've thrown a lot at you and probably going over my time, but I wanted to make sure that you all understood sort of what we're dealing with in terms of the current context and landscape, and there will be more to change. I'm going to leave you here with some national resources if you want to learn more about immigration law and organizations that are doing national work, but more importantly, the folks here to my left here are also organizations that are doing really important work to help uplift the dignity of immigrants and refugees in the state. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here today to show your support. I cannot tell you I'm an expert, and I can't follow these great ladies. I started with Catholic Charities back in July, but as an immigrant myself, I wouldn't be here today standing in front of you, talking to you, if I didn't have the support and help of folks like you, my neighbors, my teachers, my ESL instructors, my college instructors. Without the support, I wouldn't be here today. Before I start, I want to introduce you to Kellen Anker. She is the refugee programs director here at Catholic Charities. And my lovely co-workers, Shalom Lole and Francisco, they are both supervisors here at Catholic Charities. And I would love to have Shalom and Francisco come up here and help me present, because I feel like they are great. Shalom was a refugee himself. He came here to Des Moines by Catholic Charity. Catholic Charity brought Shalom here, and he was one of the Catholic Charities clients, and he is a great example of why we need to support our refugee clients. He is a supervisor now. He is one of the great examples how refugees can add to this country and add value and do a great job. Francisco has been here for about 2.5 years, so he knows way more than I do. So I want you please to come up here and join me. This is a picture of our director, Mike Sheehy. He came to the airport to welcome one of our families. He's been a great support and a great help. So because I'm a teacher and I teach ELL at DMAC, I'm gonna test you guys of something that she brought up. What is a refugee? Who can tell me what a refugee is? Wait. Don't. You're giving the answer, don't. Who can read what a refugee is? Who would like to volunteer to read what a refugee is? No one? Let's do it together. Yes.
Yeah. A refugee is someone who is forced to flee their country because of
job. Thank you. Refugee experience. Refugees, again, flee their countries because of a lot of reasons. One of them is race or ethnicity. Religion is a huge reason why a lot of refugees flee their countries, because they cannot practice their religious freedom. Nationality, also political opinion, is a huge reason why so many people decide I am not safe in my own country and I need to go find a safe place for me and my family to live. And membership of social groups. Go ahead, Francisco.
The next slide talks about how refugees get to come here to the US. There is a process from the moment they flee their country, they flee to a nearby country where they're received by UNHCR at the port of entry or in the refugee camp, and they'll sit down with the case manager, go through all their case, why they fled their country. They have to prove their persecution, and then they will be granted asylum or a place to live. When they are in the refugee camp, or if they're urban refugees in the country of where they're going to be getting assistance, they will go through various processes. RSC will do a bunch of interviews with them, prepare their case and present it to, prepare it for the US. And then they will have a bunch of interviews with specialists. They'll have a biometrics interview. They will get all their fingerprints and their biometrics ready. And then once they have a letter of welcome, they'll be prepared to flee to the country. Basically, they will be prepared by doing medical, receive all their medical attention if they have any sicknesses and all that, and be prepared to come here.
Again, we're gonna do this slide together, the same way we're gonna read together. Ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Who have voluntarily
Thank you, everybody. Okay, so talking a little bit about the world total population, a total of, I believe that's 7,989,000,000 people. Out of that, total refugees, we have 27,320,316. That's the next slide. So where are they coming from? We have a wide range of refugees that we see here come to Des Moines from all over the world. Some of the few that we're gonna mention real quick is Afghanistan, Congo, Somalia, South Sudan, Venezuela, Burma, Burundi, Eritrea, El Salvador, and Iraq. As we mentioned earlier, there are 9 VOLAGs in the United States that help resettle refugees here in the United States. We are Catholic Charities. We work under the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. They are headquarters in Washington, D.C. The other ones are IRC, which they are also in Des Moines. USCRI, U.S. Committee of Refugees and Immigrants. They're also here in Des Moines. There's also Church World Service, Episcopal Immigration Ministries, LSI, Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, World Relief, HELAS, and ECDC.
Thank you, Francisco. What are some facts? 374 reception and placement clients arrived here in Des Moines in FY24. For FY25, our numbers here at Catholic Charities is supposed to be 425, but as you all know, we are not receiving any clients right now. There is a freeze on receiving clients. For now, it's 90 days. We don't know if that's gonna change, if we're gonna receive any refugees in the 4 years, or it's a day-by-day thing. We're learning new information every single day. Countries that welcomed 124 individuals. We currently have 121 individuals that we are serving. These individuals, as Francisco said, they come from Africa, East Asia, Europe and Central Asia, Latin America and the Caribbean, and Near East and South Asia.
So that was the number that we were expected to receive this fiscal year, but you all know what happened, and all that was changed due to the realigning United States refugee admission program with Donald Trump signed and postponed all the PRM programs. So for Catholic Charities, we do have 4 different programs. The reception and placement program, which basically helps the clients who come from overseas as refugees. And then we do have a matching grant program that basically prepares those who are trying to get ready to the work, to the labor or to workforce. And then we do have a post-resettlement program that helps clients that, after the 90 days of the RNP or the reception and placement, if they do need extensive support or they're not able to be self-sufficient, then we put them in a post-resettlement program and help them be self-sufficient. We also have a PC, which is Preferred Communities Intensive Case Management, and this basically helps clients that are vulnerable and are in need of extended support.
Okay, so what Catholic Charities does in the resettlement program is we connect the refugees coming from overseas with family and friends here. We have 90 days to work with them from the point they come from the airport until 90 days afterwards. We support them with housing, apartment setups, groceries. We try to get every adult working. We enroll the children in school, and we also provide them, connecting them with their community as well, which would be local churches, local organizations, and others.
Thank you. You want to continue? Go ahead.
Yeah. So as you could see, refugees meet their case managers once they arrive from the airport, from the country of origin. Our case managers, we have vehicles, and we personally meet them. We do that all across the year. And the case manager is responsible for providing food and housing, temporary housing. Sometimes they do stay with a relative. If they don't have any connections here in the United States, we do provide a hotel for a temporary stay until we organize them into affordable housing. the first few days are overwhelming for the clients, for the refugees. They are in a new country. Most of them do not know the language, and clients depend fully on the help from the organization like Catholic Charities and the U.S. tie or U.S. friend.
Thank you. These are some of the services we provide. Oh, what happened? We provide here at Catholic Charities. As Francisco said, we meet them in the airport. We find them housings. We help clients find housing, and we pay for the rent till they have a job and they're self-sufficient to pay their own rent. We help them apply for public benefits. We enroll them in ELL classes. We enroll children in schools. A lot of our refugee clients go to Des Moines public schools. Our case managers do home visits. After we pick them up from the airport, the next morning we go what we call 24-hour home visit. We go check on them, make sure they have what they need, they have food, they have all the necessity they need. And we help them get a refugee health screening. We also have an employment and education specialist who does help refugee apply for jobs. She helps them, she creates resumes for them. She helps them and go actually with them. She actually takes them to job interviews with the help with the interpreters. We do bus trainings for all our refugee clients. And Shalom was, before he becomes a supervisor, he was over doing all the bus trainings for our refugee clients. We do a culture orientation where we teach our refugee clients about the U.S. customs and systems. And if, for example, if you have an emergency, who would you call? If you get lost riding the bus, what you do? We also know that a lot of our refugee clients come from countries that may be spanking your kids, or the way we here think it's the best way to raise your kids. It's different in other countries. So we make sure that they know what is acceptable and what's not acceptable here in the US. We teach them about the health system here in the US. So the cultural orientation, basically, it's a small window to live in here in the US. Other projects we do here at Catholic Charities is digital literacy classes, community resources referrals, and financial literacy classes that our community partners, I can't think of the bank right now, Bank of Trust, they come here and do a lot of digital literacy classes for our clients, and they do financial literacy classes for our clients. The current situation right now, we have challenges that a lot of employers are not employing any of our refugee clients. We have a huge list right now of refugee clients that they cannot get employed. We, as I said before, help them create a resume. We make sure they practice for their interviews. We take them to interviews, but we don't hear anything back. And it's sad because if these clients don't get hired and they don't have a job, what are they going to do when Catholic Charity is done with them? How they're gonna support themselves, how they're gonna support their families, how they're gonna keep their housing. this is a huge problem that we all as a society, we need to educate employers of the importance of helping these refugee clients starting a new life here in the US. We also have a housing situation. It's getting better, but still it's hard for us to place refugee clients, especially if they don't have a job. If they don't have a job, it's a cycle. You don't have a job, we're not gonna give you an apartment because who's gonna make sure you pay your rent after Catholic Charities is done with you? And again, right now, as you all know, the pause of arrival is another issue or situation that's happening right now.
One of the major support we get from the community and the church is volunteering, and our staff members do provide all the support, the core services, but we do depend heavily on volunteers to help with transportation and all other aspects of integration. We do have programs like the Catholic Charities Connect program that pairs up American families to refugee families with basically helping them to integrate. Other things that volunteers help with is doing apartment setups for new arrivals, and also providing transportation and providing support during trainings, like doing babysitting and all that. So yeah, although the staff members do provide all the core services, so there's some other minor things that the case managers might not be able to reach at because of the number of clients a case manager serves. So simple things like understanding the mail or practicing English, acquiring library cards and all that, it's by the help of the volunteers that we're able to accomplish these goals.
We were told we need to wrap up. So thank you so much for being here today and for your support and for listening to us. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Woo! Wow. Guess what? I'm going to do this. I want to see who you are. By the way, let me say this to you. Happy New Year. This is the 5th day of the year of the snake. So I wish you a lot of happiness, healthy life, and prosperity. Whatever the reason is, the difficulty that we receive, the challenges that all the refugees resettlements program here across the state, but there's no reason for us to stop doing a good thing for humans. There is no reason for that. Ladies and gentlemen, I just realized you did so well, Yang. So I just realized I'm also a risk to the nation because I was a naturalized citizen. I'm not US born. That speaks the volume of hate that our country being pushed in right now. So I am very thankful that you are here to support a good cause. The refugee resettlement program across the nation, especially in Iowa, have been a forefront for this work. The 2 top resettlement agencies in this state is the Catholic Charities, the USCCB, and the Lutheran Services in Iowa. It's a lifelong, your phone, somebody. A lifelong services. Ladies and gentlemen, I am the product of it. I was a former refugee. I was a bold person. I was among of 2 million Vietnamese fled the country after the communists of Vietnam, the Bát Thét Lao in Laos, and the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia had turned our country to the communist regime. To go back to the history, 2 million Vietnamese, Laotians, and Cambodians have fled their country, and many of us pay a dear price. If you remember the killing field, the boat people died in the ocean of South China Sea or South Sea. Half of the Vietnamese make a cross out of the 2 million people. United States was one of the countries calling for the resettlement, and our own behalf Governor Ray was the one who stood up and said, we are ready as Iowans. Iowans have opened their heart, their mind, and their homes to welcome the refugee across the Southeast Asia. That's something, it's a legacy for us, and it cannot be gone. United States of USCCB and Lutheran Social Services used to be, now in Lutheran Services in Iowa, have played an integral part of this resettlement in the last 50 years of the state of Iowa. Now, here is the case that I present to you. If you look at the refugees, resettlement, admissions, it's up and down, I have to admit. But if you remember back in 2016, when the ceiling was 85,000, when the President Obama left his office, our 45th president had almost suspended down to 16,000. President Biden had raised that up to 125,000, and last year in 2023, the first time for many years, the United States have reached out and get that many thousand people to come to a safe place to live. I know we have challenges. I know we have some issues. But here again, there is no reason for us not to begin or continue to open our mind, our heart, and out whatever we have to support this vulnerable population. When you look at the Lutheran Services in Iowa, after the Afghan evacuation in 2021, we hurriedly got back to the business of helping people. You know, our program was suspended in 2010, but 2021, with the calling of the nation, Lutheran Services in Iowa said we could do it. We not only do one place, right now we operate in Waterloo, in Sioux City. We have 3 resettlements, bringing people to Iowa for a good life, a normal life, the life that they never get to expect or experience. These refugees have been floundering in the refugee camp for years. Many of their children were born in the camp. I lived in the camp just more than a year. I could not imagine many of them lived there 10, 20, even 30 years. Imagine that for us. Imagine that the suffering that they receive daily, and now we are able to help. So therefore, right now, when you look at Lutheran Services in Iowa alone, across the 3 sites that we have 191 people that we welcome in since December 24th. Include 108 children. Guess what? It's suspended. We don't have a fund to support them now. But we're not going to give up. We are not going to give up because we know, along with us, you, the community, the people with human heart and mind are willing to support our work. So no matter what challenges we have housing shortage, employment, whatever that is, we work it out. You know, yesterday actually, when we celebrate the Vietnamese New Year across the state, we have about 800 people came to the celebration. Many of them was my former students. I seen doctor, I seen pharmacists, I seen lawyer, I seen people serve in the army, good worker, and those were the refugees. We're not a baggage, believe me. We are human and we need help. So this conversation is very critical for us as a nation, as the state, or also as a city. So on behalf of refugees, myself, I'm calling for your help. Thank you.
Hello. There's a lot of familiar faces in the room. Good to see you all. This is weird. I'm Erica Johnson. My title is Founding Executive Director of Iowa Migrant Movement for Justice. I'm going to explain who we are, talk a little bit about what the last 2 weeks have been like, and then my plan was just to end with action steps, but I'm kind of feeling pressed for time. So that's where I'm going to start, and then I'll explain why. So I'm going to go a little bit backwards. And I know that the last round in this series is also a conversation about action. So right now, what we need for people to do in the state of Iowa are have conversations with your schools, your principals, your administrators, your superintendents, and have conversations with your local law enforcement agencies, your chiefs of police and your sheriffs. So the conversations you need to have with schools is asking them what their plans are to protect their kids and their families. We've got resources, but that's as simple as I can make it right now. The conversations you need to have with your law enforcement folks are asking them what they're doing to limit cooperation between ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and local cops, local police. So that's two things, right? Things you can do wherever you are. The other thing I want you to do is make 6 phone calls a day to members of Congress. Phone calls, not just emails. I don't think they're listening to emails. I think you gotta get on the phone and bug them. So 2 phone calls to each office, their DC office and then their local office. You can choose, I don't care, whichever it is, something in Des Moines, something in Waterloo, and then their DC office. So we got 2 senators and 1 representative. 6 calls a day. They're going to get really sick of hearing from us. That's the point.
What do you want us to say to them? We'll get to questions in a minute.
Good question. And then the last 2 things have to do with getting connected and helping change the narrative. So immigrant rights organizations in our state are facing a really hard time right now, and frankly, I'm exhausted. I would actually much rather be taking a nap with my kids right now than here. No offense, I love you all. But you gotta sign up. You gotta sign up to get updates. Are all of you getting Iowa MMJ's updates? I bet some of you are. And I bet some of you got really mad that you got an email in Spanish last week for the first time. That's a new thing we're doing. So we're sending weekly updates in English and in Spanish now, in addition to the monthly updates. So sign up at our website, iowammj.org, and sign up for updates, and I promise I will send them to you. They might not always be pretty, and the links might not always work. And then if you email me back, I might not always respond. And then Gene, you're on. Gene's been texting me. He's been asking what he can do to help right now. So this is literally the least that you can do in this moment, is buy a yard sign that says "No hate in our state" on one side and "Standing together for a more welcoming Iowa," because this is all true, right? Iowa has a history of welcoming, and right now it sort of feels like we've turned our back on that. And so the yard sign, they're $20 a pop. Their QR code is taped to the wall back there, right by the signs. That's literally the least that we're asking people to do, so that we can start sending a more welcoming message around our state. Okay, those are the action steps. So Iowa MMJ, we are a relatively new organization. We were founded 5 years ago and are the result of bringing two longtime organizations together. Justice for Our Neighbors, which was a ministry of the United Methodist Church, had been in Iowa since 1999, providing immigration legal services. And then the other organization was American Friends Service Committee. Quaker organization, has offices all around the world, had been in Iowa since 1995, offering immigration legal services. So those two organizations, we decided we could be stronger together and we should not compete for resources. And so we joined forces during the pandemic, which maybe wasn't a really great idea either. It's hard to merge two organizations during the pandemic, but that's what we did. And that's who Iowa MMJ is. We do two things. We do immigration legal services around the state, and we provide advocacy, trying to change the systems through community organizing, the systems that are causing barriers for immigrants and refugees in our state. So those are the two things that we do. And then after the election, there was a third program area that we had to build. And so this is what we call, we don't really have a name for it yet, but it's essentially resisting to the immigrant attacks that we're seeing from the Donald Trump administration, and not just the Donald Trump administration, but legislators in our state, elected officials in our state. So this is nothing new. We have done this before. Iowa has seen large-scale worksite raids. Can you name them? 2006, Marshalltown. 2008, Postville. 2018, Mount Pleasant. So this is nothing new, and so we know what communities should do in order to prepare for the disaster that is the enforcement of our U.S. immigration laws. So since the election, then what we've been doing is doing a lot of Know Your Rights presentations, safety planning with partners all around the state, and then reaching out and building what we call community defense teams. So these are teams all over the state. Some of you have been in meetings already here in Polk County, bringing people together just like the Red Cross does or county emergency management teams do to get communities ready for a tornado. They bring together the stakeholders, the people who might be impacted, and they talk through what they're gonna do if something terrible happens in their community. So that's what we're doing all across the state, and the terrible thing that we're preparing for is immigration enforcement. So then after the inauguration, we have been kind of doing more to work to equip these teams around the state so that they have some structure in place, and we've also been working to relaunch our ICE reporting hotline. And so this is a hotline that is not available yet because we're working on staffing it. Volunteers, that's another thing we need. Bilingual volunteers, English, Spanish. But we've got a hotline that people can call when they've had a loved one that's been picked up or somebody has, seen some sort of ICE activity and they need some help confirming that it's true. There's a lot of rumors going around right now. And then need help, responding. People with privilege going and witnessing the activity of ICE to make sure that they're respecting people's rights and existing within the bounds of the Constitution. Okay, so the next sort of phase of what happens next, what this all looks like over the next 4 years is a question mark. But the idea is that we are preparing for the worst and hoping for the best and depending on each other and knowing that this is all really for the long haul. Because again, while Iowa has a welcoming history, we have a lot of work to do right now because Iowa is not being very welcoming right now.
So now it's your turn. If you have questions, whether they're from the cards that you wrote or a question has just come to your mind, I will bring the microphone to you. If you have ever been to one of Interfaith Alliance of Iowa Crossroads luncheons, same kind of format. And so don't speak unless you have a microphone in your hand. But I'm going to start with the question that was up here, and it's to you, Erica. You asked us to make 6 phone calls a day. What do you want folks to say to our congressional, you already mic'd, congressional folks?
I think it's, like, honestly, it's kind of hard to keep up right now. One of the reasons why I'm telling you to get on our email list is because I'm trying to send weekly breakdowns of the executive orders and the different policies that have been put into place so that you can go and kind of keep track yourself. But they need to hear from you in even the most general terms. Like, these aren't the things that Iowans value. So we rescind the sensitive locations memo, for example. This memo that said that enforcement activity shouldn't occur at churches and schools and public demonstrations and places like that. Places where we as Americans typically sort of identify should be sacred spaces, places where we expect that our constitutional rights, the things that this country stands for and values would be protected. So our members of Congress, it'd be really great if they could hear from you all and say, even though the Trump administration doesn't value these things, they've rescinded this memo, I want you to know that I do value these things. And I value that my kids should be safe at school. And I value my freedom to express my religious beliefs and do so in a safe space, and that these enforcement activities shouldn't occur. So even in its most general terms, just things like that. I don't have a script for you, I'm sorry. Sometimes we do. But right now, they just need to hear from people the generalized outrage that this moment is provoking in folks.
A lot of information on the PowerPoints. A lot of it had to go through quickly because of time. I'm wondering if the PowerPoints will be available after this, after today in any way. But I do have a follow-up, which is the question about community defense teams. I'm here with people from Grinnell, and I think maybe one question we might ask is, if we wanted to have a community defense team, how would your website have information on how to do that?
Not on our website. But we're holding, we had a meeting like last Friday with people like yourselves from all around the state, where we talked through the mechanics of what that looks like, and we have a toolkit for you. So the answer is, send me an email.
And in answer to your question about the availability of the slides, we will be providing an archival recording of this session this afternoon, and we can make those slides available with that. And we will post those on the websites of St. Catherine of Siena and also the Diocese of Des Moines website.
So just Google questions.
You also asked us to contact our police departments. What should our message be to them?
For that one, I think I can get a little more specific and maybe send you some like bullet points. For example, one of the things that we've asked the Des Moines Police Department to do, and we'll be meeting with the Marshalltown folks soon because they've got a new chief now, is deprioritizing low-level offenses so that folks don't get caught up in this low-level criminal offense to deportation pipeline. So that's one thing. And then again, it's fine to be general and let them know that you are looking for them to collaborate less with ICE.
Okay, first I have a comment. We need to call these people immigrants or refugees, not aliens. They're not aliens. Okay, and then my next one is for the lawyer. I'm very worried about this citizenship, birthright citizenship. And I'm hearing the Trump administration is saying it was meant for the blacks after the Civil War. Do you think that's going to hold water?
Laura, do you want to?
I do not think, we're both lawyers. So I'll just really quick, because I did a podcast on it recently, I'll just quick jump in to say, I don't think it will be found to be constitutional to restrict birthright citizenship based on the immigration status of a parent. That has been litigated in the past in the case that Zur mentioned for back in the, I didn't talk about the Chinese Exclusion Act, but we had a whole thing about Chinese exclusion, and that was already decided. So I think it's a real, I don't think that will happen. I guess one never knows, but I really am not that concerned about it. What about you?
I mean, I think it's interesting because for people in my position who are either naturalized citizens or citizens born here, we may feel comfortable, right, at this moment to say maybe the future is not that bleak. But I think for individuals who have children that are yet to be born or about to be born or have been born, the possibility of stripping away U.S. citizenship status is a real fear and a real concern, right? Because I can't predict what the next 4 years are going to look like, but I think that as we've talked about, that we need to prepare for the worst. I also would like to believe that our Constitution and our legal precedents will hold strong, and that this attempt to strip birthright citizenship has already been, their groups have already sued, and there is current blockage with an injunction. But that's not to say that this administration or future administrations will not attempt to chip away at that constitutional protection. So I think it's really important for us to continue to be vigilant and do what we can to speak up and speak for that protection.
Okay, I have a very small question. Has anyone experienced working with refugees or immigrants who are deaf or hard of hearing? And, what is the process of working with individuals who come to our country who have a disability? Gus is speaking. I have worked with the deaf and hard of hearing community for many, many years, so I'm just asking.
Yeah, we do have a client right now we're serving who is deaf, and we welcome any resources and any services we can have to provide these families the help they need and they deserve. So any resources or services you can provide us with, that would be very appreciated.
When I work with the school system, Des Moines Public School, we did receive a lot of children, not a lot, but number of children who are deaf and hard hearing. We do provide, at the time when I worked with Des Moines School, we did provide services to them and their family through the bilingual liaison that we have in the system. So it was like three-way communications, but it was very effective back then.
So with more than likely a lot of stakeholders that are involved in organizational standard operating procedures, schools, churches, et cetera, that are here, what is the current law, and what can a policy be in denying entry? What parts of a community space can be denied entry now that immigration, the ICE memo has been rescinded, and what can't churches, so that people know, even if it's a church, it might not be a safe space for everybody to congregate after a raid?
Good question.
I can probably address that quickly. Stay tuned. In fact, I'm in the process of putting together a Zoom webinar to help with our clergy leaders who are really concerned with that particular issue. But in a synopsis, the slide that I presented, which kind of walks you through some 5 steps that you should do, is essentially right now an inventory and protocol assessment for your own organizations. There are a lot of really great resources online. Both Erica's organization and my organization can send you links to actual handouts and resources that can help guide your organization to be better prepared for those ICE target enforcement. But the simple fact is, regardless of the rescission of this memo, organizations and institutions and individuals still have constitutional protections and rights. And so learn them, use them, assert them, and obviously consult with legal counsel to make sure that you don't inadvertently, obviously, do something that will create legal exposure for your organizations and institutions. But that's what I would advise at this moment.
Hello, I'm gonna piggyback on his question. I'm a teacher at a school, and our priority is to keep students safe because it's a safe environment. So I know that if ICE shows up, if they don't have a warrant, they can't come into our building. But as a teacher, even if they have a warrant, what are the repercussions for us teachers trying to protect these kids, and how do we help them when ICE is already there?
I mean, I'll just jump in quickly, and then one thing you have to remember is, ICE is an armed service of the federal government, and if they have a judicial warrant that is for a person or to search a place, they're going to be able to do that. And I guess you can make your choice about what you do, but physically obstructing or hiding people is a criminal offense that you could be arrested for yourself, okay? Mm-hmm. And so, it's important, that's why it's important that the people at the front office, the people that know to look at warrants, know to look whether you're not going to stop an armed service from coming into your building by saying, you don't have a warrant if they really want to come into your building. But you can say, I don't consent to the search, and you can record what happens on your cell phone. And you can keep track of those things. You can keep the children calm, and you can make sure if anyone's detained that law enforcement knows that they have medical conditions or they have family considerations, like children they need to pick up or things like that, or those kind of things. So we can still protect people. We can also tell people that they have the right to remain silent and they have the right to counsel. We can't tell them, don't talk to the police, but we can say, you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to have counsel, and you can have a number for lawyers that you can call. And so those are things that we can do, but I'm just saying you will put yourself personally at risk if you try to physically stop something like that happen. You can make that choice, but that would be the consequence.
So I just wanted to offer, I've been an advocate for different causes over the years, and right now we have a lot of people that are very anxious and wanting to do something, and new advocates. And there's this website out there that I have found really helpful and very specific about what to say to legislators. And it's 5calls.org, 5calls.org. And it goes through a list of different issues, not just on immigration, but on the cabinet selections and all of that. It gives a little narrative about what's happening, and then it goes very specifically about, it offers different scripts of what to say, and then you can also click on and find out who your representative is and what their phone number is. And the phone numbers, the calls are so much more important than the emails. They're just more penetrating. But this is an excellent resource, and I've offered it to some friends in the last few days, and they update it based on different craziness that comes up out there. So.
Did you have a question? I have one question left.
I'm very nervous about doing this because I came here to hear about immigration, and I support the people, and I want to help the people, and I'm proud to have helped the people from Vietnam back in the 70s. But I hear a division, and I'm so tired of division. I came here and I heard positive things about helping the immigrant community, and then I hear the division where we have to object. You know what? There are things that I'm scared about. As an older person, maybe I have no reason to be. I'm not laying awake at night, not able to sleep, but there are things that need to be corrected in the immigration program. And if you divide us so that we have those for and those against, we're not going to get anywhere. Let's work together in peace and positivity instead of negative divide.
You know, I'll go ahead. You gonna say something? Ben, you gonna say something? I just wanted to say super quickly that, thank you for saying that. And we've lost, I mean, no one, what should I say? I don't think anyone up here would say that a violent criminal should not be, come to pay for their crimes and be deported from the United States. I mean, I would not say that. The problem is really knowing what's happening and understanding who is getting deported and who is. So I think we definitely need to change our immigration laws. Many of us up here have been working for 25 years to do that, and it hasn't happened. So yes, we should talk to each other, but we need to talk to each other in truth, not in myths and lies. And so that's what we're trying to bring forward.
I would just echo what Lori said. I think one of the things that we're all up here doing is providing you real information that's based on facts and the law, and it's not based on just what social media someone wants to tweet, in 2 o'clock in the morning and create fear and panic. And so you all being here is a first step at getting informed and educated so we can all make informed decisions and speak the truth and accurately, so there isn't going to be division when we all understand the truth about immigration law and who's being impacted.
I want to thank you all. Just a reminder that the dialogue series is presented by St. Catherine of Siena Catholic Church and Student Center at Drake University. Faith in Action for the Common Good is the theme of the series, which invites people of all spiritual walks of life to listen, to converse, and then act to improve conditions that benefit all members of society. I want to thank our panelists for your participation today. For being willing to share your expertise. But mostly, I want to thank you for the work that you do every day in our community, across our state, on and with and behalf of the immigrant and refugee communities. Thank you so much. We hope to see you again on Sunday, March 2nd at 2 p.m. at Sheslow Auditorium. That's on the Drake campus, as we have an amazing opportunity to listen to Mark Seitz, Bishop of El Paso, Texas, who is in the thick of it in that state. His keynote is entitled Broken at the Border. And then also on Saturday, March 29th at 10 a.m. at St. Catherine of Siena Church, we'll dig into an action workshop. How can we help? Again, thank you to our panel members. Thank you to each of you who are in the room, those of you who are watching online, and remembering that we are all in this together in order to make our world and our communities a better place for all people. Thank you so much.